That brings us on to our main topic.
Yes, here we go.
So, Rob, how did this all come about? Well, we were doing our list makers, and one of our listeners, and I'm very sorry I've forgotten to save the tweet. I was on holiday at the time we had this discussion, thought I'd saved it, and it turns out I haven't. So if it was you, please let us know, and we will thank you properly. But one of our listeners said, why don't you do top 5 performances by Doctor Who actors in other shows? And I said, look, I'd love to do that, but unfortunately, I did exactly that topic as a guest on 42 to Doomsday 4 or 5 years ago, so I would feel a bit weird doing it. And then I thought, but there's still a good conversation to have there. Why don't we make it a main topic and do all 13?
Yes.
And I suggested it to you, and you didn't take any persuading at all. So, as I said, we're not saying best, we're not saying favourite, we're not saying most interesting. It could be any of those or something else, but we're highlighting each a performance by the actors who played the Doctor in something else. You might agree with us, you might disagree with us, or hopefully perhaps you'll think that sounds really interesting and go out and have a watch and see some of these actors we all love in other things. Now, as we go through, I thought it's a little bit predictable to go from Hartnell to Whittaker in order again, so I have put all of the Doctors into a DVD cover, and we're going to draw them out randomly just to spice things up a bit.
I like it.
So, Rob, do you want to kick us off with the first Doctor? Or the first actor, I should say.
You threw me there.
And appropriately enough, it is Peter Davison.
Oh, Davo. Okay. For Davo, I have picked the TV series A Very Peculiar Practice, with the runner-up being At Home with the Braithwaites. I don't have a runner-up for each category, by the way. But A Very Peculiar Practice, I like this series from 1986 very much, as it's quirky, it's very black humour. It has David Troughton and Graham Crowden in it.
Oh, cool.
Basically, Davo is a doctor at a medical centre at a university, and everyone there is a bit weird. Davo is basically the straight man to all of this, just absolutely bewildered at what's going on around him. And it's really entertaining. In At Home with the Braithwaites, meanwhile, he's much older. This is a series from 2000. So what, he would have been in his 50s, early 50s around then, I think, where he's very much a put-upon dad in a family that wins the lottery, but have they won the lottery legally? It's very funny and also very weird at times too. So 2 very quirky TV series that Davo's been in, Very Peculiar Practice and At Home with the Braithwaites.
Interesting. I've gone something different with Davo, and that is a 1993 telemovie called Harnessing Peacocks.
Oh, I think I've heard of this. Definitely not seen it.
This was a star vehicle for an actress by the name of Serena Scott Thomas, who was just breaking out at the time. It's based on a Mary Wesley novel, and it's one of those very sort of twee, larger-than-life English characters that she has in those novels. It's very sort of rom-com-y, but done very dry and very sort of, not seriously, but that sort of British pathos is sort of in there. Yeah. And once again, actually, Davison plays the straight character. You've got a woman who basically decides that her biggest skill is making love. And so therefore she decides that she's going to have her peacocks, who are people she picks, who are allowed to pay her to make love with them. And that's how she earns her money. And she does very well. Her son goes to a private boarding school and all of that sort of thing. And so there's all these bizarre peacocks that she has that are running around, and they all decide they're in love with her and want it to be serious. And in amongst all of this craziness is Peter Davison, who
I like it already.
He's the one who she met when she was a young teenager in Italy, had a night of passion, never found again, and then slowly they start to find each other.
Right.
And it's really, really kooky. It's really, really interesting. And his performance there is just one that carries it. This would be a kind of a farce and kind of ridiculous and probably not really watchable if you didn't have this one bit of straightness. Yeah. Just holding the whole narrative together. And he does it really, really well.
Oh, that's excellent. Excellent. I can see a pattern in the roles Davo plays, maybe.
I think so. Oh, look, I was tempted to say the dish of the day, but I didn't think there was enough to say there. I'll get us started with our next one, which is David Tennant. his
Tennant.
His son-in-law.
Okay.
Now, my go-to for David Tennant used to be an episode of The Bill called Deadline, which was in 1995, one of his first TV roles, and he's excellent in that. But I've updated that to his performance as Des Nilsson in Des, which was a 3-part miniseries released by the BBC in 2020, where he plays the serial killer, as I said, Des Nilsson. And it is an extraordinary performance. It is a reminder of just how fantastically good an actor David Tennant is. Mm-hmm. He plays a serial killer who lurches between enjoying his notoriety and feeling not guilt for what he's done, but maybe understanding what he's done. It's all sort of done through the eyes of the police who discover the crime and are then interviewing him, and more than anything, just trying to find out why this guy did this stuff.
Right.
And through it all, Tennant is just impenetrable. Mm-hmm. And it's unscrupulous, and it's really, really good. It's a good reminder of just how good David Tennant is, and I'm a big fan. And look, it is a little bit gruesome, I warn you of that, but if you are a David Tennant fan and you haven't seen it, do check that out. But also, the Bill episode Deadline is on YouTube. If you want to see a young David Tennant, again, playing a very crazy character, check that out as well.
Awesome. And he also plays quite a weird, crazy guy in an episode of Randall and Hopkirk Deceased, the remake of that, which had Vic Reeves and Bob Mortimer as the leads.
Well, he got his big breakout role playing a guy in Taking Over the Asylum.
Right, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I remember that's the first time I saw him in stuff. He was only about 18 or 19 when I did that, I think.
Yeah, so he's good at it.
He's good at it. What's your Tennant pick, Rob?
Well, I was going to say Tennant's just bloody everywhere, so you're spoiled for choice. Do I say Casanova, which pretty much won him Doctor Who? Do I say Broadchurch, where I think he was really good? What about Jessica Jones, where he played a bad guy who was just astonishing, across a whole series? But no, I'm going to go with Good Omens, as I think it's just a super Neil Gaiman, Terry Pratchett piece, and I think Tennant's character Crowley has some really nice scenes bouncing wonderfully off Michael Sheen, and then when COVID came along, Sheen and Tennant did that series together where they would talk across Skype or Zoom or whatever it was. They sort of have this bromance going on these days. And it all sort of kicked off here, I think. It's just so fun to watch. Michael Sheen being the good angel and David Tennant being the bad angel, and they're meant to hate each other and fight each other, but they get along and have lunch and things together. It's just such a great show, and I'm so pleased there's a new series of it coming up soon. Yes, I've been meaning to watch that and haven't, so it's a good reminder to me that I do need to. But yeah, look, a very strong actor, and look, the 14th Doctor. Yes, that's it. John Pertwee. Pertwee, the Pert. Gosh, I wonder if we'll have a snappy. We haven't talked about snaps, have we? I think we'll have snaps. It's possible. For Pertwee, I'm going with Wurzel Gummidge. And I can't go past this because, like Doctor Who, it's so very much a part of my childhood. In fact, I'm sure I've mentioned on the podcast before that I was probably watching Wurzel Gummidge before I was seriously watching Doctor Who. And as a result, I was watching Pertwee as Gummidge before he was the Doctor, which is just extraordinary for me to think about now, because Wurzel Gummidge isn't something I've watched for a long time. For the uninitiated, Wurzel Gummidge is a scarecrow who runs around the countryside having, crazy adventures, and there's been a remake of it actually in recent years with Mackenzie Crook. Yes. Which is very good too. It's different to the Pertwee show, but it's still very, very good. And I just think this lovely countryside and Pertwee being Pertwee and putting on his funny voices and all the different heads he would wear as Wurzel, because he could change his heads, if you've not seen it, have different heads for different things he was going to do. My thinking head or my... Thinking head, that's it, yeah. Just wonderful memories of Wurzel Gummidge for Pertwee. Yeah, look, I have as well. I also just want to give a shout out to his radio work on the Navy Lark, which is really, really good. Mm-hmm. But I could not go beyond his guest appearance in the Goodies episode of Wacky Whales as the Reverend Quellen from 1975. Look, this is one of those performances where a guest actor walks into a show and just takes it over. And when you're performing against Graham Garden, Tim Brooke Taylor and Bill Oddie, and you're able to just blow them off the screen for status
and comedy. It just shows how great an actor you are. And that turn from Jon Pertwee is just hilarious. The vocal comedy, the physical comedy, the dramatic acting in there. It's just absolutely perfect. You can see why this man was known for his comic chops. You can see why he was a vaudeville performer, and he used to have his cabaret shows where he'd go out there and do some songs and sort of tell some jokes and tell anecdotes. And just, I wish that we could have seen more of that on video. I really, really do. But I just think that episode of The Goodies with Jon Pertwee is just brilliant and shows just how good he was.
Yeah, it's wild how so much stuff from even the 70s, but particularly the 80s, has shown up on video, and yet Pertwee's cabaret show, no. Isn't that weird?
It is. I guess there just probably weren't nearly as many home videos at the time, so it is a shame. I'll keep us going with our next one, which is Christopher Eccleston.
Eccleston, okay.
Again, lots of really good stuff that we could mention here. I have gone, though, for one of his earlier performances. It's the first thing I ever saw him in, and that is the movie Shallow Grave from 1994, which he co-stars in with a young actor by the name of Ewan McGregor, who would break out a couple of years after that as well. In this movie, basically, the three of them accidentally commit a murder and then have to get rid of the body and then pretend that nothing's happened. And it's all about how these three characters slowly come to terms and try to deal with this. And Christopher Eccleston is the one who can't and goes slowly crazy. And look, it's just an incredible performance. I remember a bunch of us, all actually Doctor Who fans, completely randomly, but we used to catch up and go around to people's houses and sometimes watch movies, and someone said, "You've got to watch this movie, I'm putting on Shallow Grave," and all of us just being utterly transfixed by Christopher Eccleston's performance. And a few years later, hey, you remember that guy who played the crazy guy in Shallow Grave? He's the new Doctor. It's a really good movie. Ewan McGregor's really good in it as well. I think it's worth checking out.
Awesome. For Eccleston, I thought he's got such a checkered history with roles. Like, do I go for Existenz from the late 90s, which is a David Cronenberg horror sci-fi, or his G.I. Joe film, or his Thor movie? And I flicked through so many things. I'm like, oh, no, I can't do any of these.
Even he wouldn't pick his Thor movie.
I know. So I'm thinking, I can't pick that. But I've gone with Heroes, because Heroes was a TV series I really loved. I recall it got messed around like many series did by that big writer's strike, and when it came back it was never quite the same. But the first series of Heroes in particular was real water cooler stuff, and it really grabbed my imagination, and I really liked it. And Eccleston's role in it as a guy who could turn invisible, I think, is worth a rewatch today, as is all of Heroes, if not just the first season. You know, he's in not many eps. I think he might be like half a dozen or something, but it's great. It's post-Doctor Who, and there were some funny stories at the time that the production team were always trying to get him to do Doctor Who-y type things, like, oh, do you want to wear a scarf in this episode? He'd be like, no, I'm not having that. Sort of thing. I think he even writes about it in his autobiography. It's quite interesting. But yeah, I'd say Heroes for Eccleston.
Yeah, look, fair enough. And when we put this out on Twitter, Rob from 42 to Doomsday very correctly did nominate his role in Cracker, which is particularly appropriate and poignant given that we lost Robbie Coltrane this month as well.
Very sad, yeah.
Rob, I'll get you to continue with the new series and the very latest ex-actor to play the Doctor, or actress in fact, Jodie Whittaker.
Jodie Whittaker. I'm going to go here, Dave, with Attack the Block. Now, this might seem an odd choice because with Whittaker we have something like Broadchurch, which, for its first series at least, was genuine must-see TV. And although her character wasn't an easy character to fall in love with, I don't know if that's the right term, but, you know, she was a sad, angry, grieving mother. You know, I think her portrayal was excellent. But in Attack the Block, meanwhile, she's part of an ensemble. And it's such a weird, horrific comedy about an alien invasion, and she's really tough and a bit spiky in it. John Boyega, Finn from the Star Wars movies, is in it. I actually, whenever I see it, I wish her doctor was more like how she acts in this film. You know, and it just goes to show that people who criticise her performance, like, oh, she can't act. Well, yes, she can. Go and watch Broadchurch, watch Attack the Block, watch any number of things she's been in. You might not like how she played the Doctor, but she can do other things. And I do actually wish she had played the Doctor maybe more like her Attack the Block character.
Fair enough. My pick for Jodie Whittaker is a 2011 episode from Series 1 of Black Mirror. And I was a bit staggered to realise that Black Mirror's first season is 11 years ago. That kind of blew me away. The episode's called The Entire History of You. And the premise or the Black Mirror conceit of this episode is that we're in a future now where a piece of tech just inserted behind your ear can record all of your memories and you can play them back either to yourself or on a screen for other people to watch. And Jodie Whittaker and her husband go to a dinner party, and from that, the husband discovers that she's cheated on him in the past. And they're able to use all of his memories of the night and her memories of the event to put it all together and react. So this role relies on a very subtle and very detailed performance by Jodie, because it hinges on you watching a scene and maybe getting some takeaways from it, but then when it's played again, you take away a different twist on it, or you see a particular reaction or a particular laugh or a particular look that starts to give away what's been going on. And so it's a really, really good performance. And as they get further into this and the husband slowly breaks down at this discovery about his wife, she has to react to all that. So it's a really strong performance from her. And again, one of her earlier ones 11 years ago.
Yeah, I would say too, a very good script, but she nails it, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So I will keep going.
Okay, what have we got?
We have Tom.
Tom.
I've got to say, this was one of the harder ones for me to pick, because Tom, particularly post-Doctor Who, has really just played Tom.
Yeah.
I was quite tempted to go with his role as Captain Rum in Blackadder, but I did settle on a role prior to Doctor Who, and that is his very famous role as Rasputin, appropriate given last week, his role as Rasputin in Nicholas and Alexander from 1971. This is one of the roles that really brought him to attention. It's one of the roles that really got him noticed, and it is an interesting performance because you can see Tom there. You can see all the Tom weirdness and the Tom larger-than-lifeness there, but it's not Tom after Doctor Who. It's Tom before that. It's Tom still finding his way as an actor. It's Tom still developing that character, and there's a really interesting performance that we're not quite used to from him that's really, really good. So Nicholas and Alexander as Rasputin for Tom.
Very nice. I've gone for a bit of a different vibe here. I've gone for The Book Tower.
I'm not familiar with that.
Oh, okay, because this is Tom, obviously, but it's Tom being a presenter. I had to look up how many episodes of Book Tower he did, and it was 22. And of course, there were other presenters of Book Tower that followed on from Tom. It was this really amazing show, Dave, which I remember being on the ABC as a kid, that would be presented by someone and they would read from a book and you would see illustrations from the book. And the idea was to get you into reading books. You know, it was such a British show, you know, but one of these things I remember as a young kid, even though all the presenters are now muddled in my head. But yeah, Tom did 22 episodes of this concurrent with Doctor Who towards the end of his run. So it's like a TV show opening and Tom as the Doctor, although he's not in costume, reading books to you, if that makes sense.
No, it does. I didn't know he did that, but that does sound really cool.
Yeah, there should be episodes of Tom doing Book Tower on, I don't know, if not YouTube, then one of the other Daily Motion or something like that. I'm sure there are some out there. So look them up, folks. You might quite enjoy it. So
neither of us picked The Lives and Loves of a She-Devil then?
That was notorious in our fan group because didn't he show his bum in it? Is he having sex? And you see his bum?
The Tom sex scene particularly has his vocals.
That's right.
which have to be heard to be believed. It is a memorable performance, but not one I could recommend, except as But yeah, anyway, we'll keep going.
I'm glad you mentioned that though, because I do remember that being sort of notorious in our club back in the day.
Yeah, it was in ours as well. Back to the start, Rob. What did you pick for William Hartnell?
William Hartnell. Look, I'll be the first to admit I haven't seen Hartnell in a lot of things. I have seen Brighton Rock. I have seen This Sporting Life. These are two films that he's often mentioned in. They're very good films. I've seen them.
Yep.
But I thought it might be fun to pick the first Carry On film, which is Carry On Sergeant, because Hartnell is playing the aforementioned Sergeant. And it's the kind of role he was typecast in so many films, always a bit of a hard man, a sergeant type character, unlike what he did in Doctor Who on the whole, where he's quite, light and twinkly. But it's a comedy, of course, so it's not like those other roles either, because it's a carry-on film, although it is the first carry-on film, so it's not quite like what they evolve into over however many they made, like 20-something. I don't know how many they made, Dave. But I would just like to pull out, the first carry-on film has William Hartnell in it as the sergeant of the title of the film.
That's a really good pick. And look, you did pick a couple of really good movies as well, that I think a couple of people did mention as well on Twitter when we raised this up. I have gone for a 1945 Hartnell movie.
Oh, God, yeah.
I was tossing up between that and a 1946 Hartnell movie, Appointment with Crime, but I picked a 1945 Hartnell movie, Murder in Reverse, which is one of his first big starring roles. Mm-hmm. This is where he plays a man who is charged with and convicted for a murder, not only that he didn't commit, but that we later discover didn't even happen.
Oh, wow.
And the movie goes on. I'm not that worried about spoiling a movie that's how many years old? 70 something.
Yeah.
It goes on, and after he is released from prison, he first goes about trying to redeem himself and get himself acquitted. But as it takes a twist, you realise that if you've already done a jail sentence for killing somebody and they're still alive, if you kill them,
ooh, yes,
I'll leave it there.
I like it.
It's a really, really good movie, and it's just a really strong performance for him as a much younger man. So yeah, I'm a big fan of that. But look, we've mentioned a number of really good Hartnell movies in there.
Why don't they remake films like that? They do remakes of films that don't need to be remade, whereas something like that from so long ago, that could do with a remake.
Yeah, a lot of those films that they used to churn out back in those days, they sort of 90 to 100-minute thrillers, hard-boiled detective stuff. They're really, really good. They're incredibly watchable.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're jumping almost to the other end with Peter Capaldi.
PCAP.
A number of things here that I did sort of toss around in my head. The Personal History of David Copperfield from a few years ago was really good. I liked him in that. But I can't go past his performance as Malcolm Tucker in The Thick of It. And I'm particularly going to highlight the final episode of The Thick of It. Now, the final season of The Thick of It is actually my favourite of all of them. That's where the Labor Party that Tucker is the spin doctor of has been booted into opposition, and the Conservative Lib Dem coalition is now in government, so we get a lot of fun with that. But we now see Tucker play behind the scenes of the opposition, and it's really, really good, but it then gets dark and it starts to explore some of the stuff that was happening in the UK at that time. In particular, government policy leads to a high-profile suicide of an individual, and this leads to an inquiry into spin doctoring from all the parties and how that all works. And in the end, Tucker has to resign. And the way that Capaldi plays it, having spent 3 seasons, 3 3/4 seasons as this untouchable, powerful force of nature, suddenly watching reality catch up with him and watching his whole world not just fall apart, but fall apart in a really significant way. It's just a masterful performance, and I think that, look, he's great in all of The Thick of It, but that last episode or two, he is incredible.
Well, snap!
There had to be at least one.
How can I not choose this? Sure, he's been in some good movies. His turn in Torchwood is amazing. But, come on, Malcolm Tucker is one of the great characters. And I can see in hindsight why people wanted that to sort of bleed over into the Doctor. Even I did, before we actually saw what he was doing with the Doctor. But when I actually reflected back on that first series, I thought, oh, no, that was a mistake. Malcolm Tucker is Malcolm Tucker, the Doctor is the Doctor, and never the twain should meet. But in his own series, where he's being Malcolm Tucker, and it's all designed around that, he's just great as Malcolm Tucker. As I say, one of the great characters. I love it, full stop.
Yeah, it is very, very good. Rob, we have got the final new series Doctor, of course, Matt Smith.
Smithy, I'm going to go with The Crown here, Dave, for two reasons. One is I think Smith does an excellent Prince Philip across the 20 episodes he's in. And I had to check that. I didn't think it was as many as that, but it is actually 20 episodes.
It is, yeah.
And the other is that I think that is the best era of The Crown, those first 20 episodes, far enough away back in time and taking in subjects that are just really enjoyable to watch. And I think as that series has progressed, it's become more sensationalist. It seems to have a bit of an agenda going on. I don't blame Judi Dench at all for writing that letter recently.
No, I agree with everything Judi Dench said.
Early on, though, great. And a big part of that greatness was Smithy as Prince Philip. I think he was really fabulous in it. I really do.
Yeah, like a lot of people, I went back and watched the first series of The Crown over the last month because of some fairly obvious events that have occurred. And yeah, he is extraordinary in that. But I have picked one of his earlier roles, and that is his role in the 2007 series Party Animals.
I thought you might go there.
Look, you know, Rob, that I'm a big fan of this. This is where I was one of the few people who'd actually seen Matt Smith before he'd been cast as the Doctor. Yes. And I remember everyone's going, who is this guy? Is he able to play the Doctor? I said, no. Check him out in Party Animals. I know exactly why he's been cast to play the Doctor. In this role, he plays the son of a deceased former Labor MP who is now a staffer, now a researcher for a Labor shadow cabinet minister. And it's one of those series where he has to pull against his idealism and his commitment to the Labour cause and his commitment to what his father fought for, and just the reality of 21st century British politics, the grubbiness of it on occasions, the way that a good idea can be blown up by a poor piece of presentation. He has to deal with all of that. His brother is a very successful private spin doctor, consultant, and his brother's sort of, the older, flashier, gets all the girls sort of guy with a bit of money and all the rest of it. And Smith's the younger, lives with his brother on the couch, but he believes in something, God damn it, and all the dynamics come out of that. It's a really, really good series. I say, as somebody who works in politics, it is the closest any TV series has ever come to properly capturing what politics really is like. Mm-hmm. It's the show that made me go, that guy should play the Doctor.
Wow, big call.
Patrick Troughton. I will note here that one of our Twitter followers, Professor Stephen Hawkwind, did suggest his role as a pervy old tramp in Morse, which was definitely a good performance, and his last one, I believe. I have picked his performance as the Duke of Norfolk in The Six Wives of Henry VIII, which was a big 1970 BBC miniseries, and it goes through the 6 episodes, one for each wife, with Henry VIII played by Keith Michelle. It's one of those series that I think it has its ups and downs. The problem is they've decided that each wife gets 90 minutes, which means in the case of Catherine of Aragon, you've got about 20 years truncated into 90 minutes. In the case of Anne of Cleves, you've got 2 conversations desperately expanded out to 90 minutes. But through 5 of the 6 episodes, you have Troughton playing the Duke of Norfolk, who is this arch manipulator. He is this person always looking to get himself and his family closer to power. In the end, he finally manipulates his niece, Catherine Howard, into becoming the new queen and Henry's 5th wife, and that ends horribly for all concerned. But it's just this amazing performance where he has to be serious and he has to be charming and he has to be ruthless, and it would have been one of the first things he did after Doctor Who, and you can see him using this to break type very, very quickly.
Interesting. I've not seen that myself.
Oh, okay. It's look, I don't think it's as good as Elizabeth R, which was the sequel, but it's definitely worth a look.
Okay. For Troughton, I've gone with a hobo type character, but not the one that was suggested. I've gone with All Creatures Great and Small.
Oh, yes.
And as we know, Troughton was very much a character actor. And this is a great example of him being a character actor to a T. He's playing Roddy, the hobo, in the episode Hair of the Dog. So this is around 1980, I think. So it's a few years before he and Davo will be together in the Five Doctors. But they share some scenes in this story, which I always think is quite cool to watch. As a Doctor Who fan, you're watching it and you're thinking, there's the second Doctor and the fifth Doctor, but it hasn't happened in the Five Doctors. That geeky sort of stuff that you do. So it has some nice memories for me in that respect as well, but it's also a really great episode of early All Creatures Great and Small, which is the best All Creatures Great and Small. So I've gone with that.
Yeah, that is a good performance, and look, I do agree. Those first couple of seasons of All Creatures, they are superb. They're really, really good.
Yeah.
Keep us going, please, Rob.
Yes, with who?
Colin Baker.
Colin Baker. Colin is problematic insofar as before Doctor Who, I only really know his Blake Seven role. I mean, we talk about things like The Brothers, but I've never seen The Brothers. And after Doctor Who, he hasn't done a lot of film, and TV has been, an episode of this and an episode of that. And I think he's probably done more theatre than anything else, which, being down here, I haven't been privy to. So I'll acknowledge that he may have been in some brilliant theatre and may have done some great one-off episodes in other shows, but they're shows I don't watch. So I got a bit stuck. So I've actually plumped for the Five-ish Doctors.
Oh, nice.
As something really fun and really heartfelt and really nice of him to take up the spirit of and play himself in and just have a bit of fun around the time of the 50th anniversary. So maybe not a super serious pick here, but one I think is very enjoyable to watch, and I appreciate him doing it.
It is wonderful to see Colin in that, just having fun, isn't it?
Yeah, love it.
I was tossing up between a couple of picks for Colin, both stuff before he was cast as the Doctor. I almost picked his role in the Fall of Eagles miniseries from 1974, where a very young Colin Baker plays the Crown Prince Wilhelm. And he's in those last couple of episodes where the German Empire is falling apart and eventually his dad has to abdicate. But he wasn't in that enough for me to really justify it. So look, I did go with the obvious pick. I did pick him as Baben the Butcher in Blake 7 because look, that is just a wonderful performance. He's one of the few actors, probably one of two, along with Savadant, one of the two actors who can really out Darrow, Paul Darrow.
Yeah.
And particularly that scene where he's there with Michael Keating's villa and he just has that little monologue and he's sort of doing all the, my mother used to say, babe should say, she called me babe. Babe should say, treat every hour as though it's your last. I'll be back in an hour, Villa. It's a wonderful performance. It's a brilliant, entertaining performance. And I just think, look, if you haven't seen him, you've got to.
Yeah, agree.
I will keep going. And looks like we're going to be doing the last couple in order because the next we have is Sylvester McCoy. Mm-hmm. And I have picked Sylvester McCoy in The Air Zone Solution.
Okay.
Which was a 1993 semi-professional, semi-fan-made production. It was made by Bill Baggs Video, written by Nick Briggs, and despite that, it's still not bad. But Sylvester McCoy is in there, and I should say, it stars John Pertwee, Sylvester McCoy, Peter Davison, and Colin Baker.
Right.
And Sylvester McCoy plays a activist who is working with a journalist, played by Peter Davison, to try and expose a company that's doing some quite nefarious environmental things. And there's a couple of reasons why I picked this. First of all, seeing him interact with Peter Davison is really, really interesting because, as we highlighted right at the start of our list, Davo often plays those quite straight roles that hold everything together, whereas McCoy is known as, the guy who put his ferret down his pants.
Yeah.
And to see those two characters, those two actors interact is actually really, really interesting and a really good dynamic. But it's also good to see McCoy playing a role very different to what we're used to as that sort of activist. And he can be quirky with a little bit of gravitas, but he's not playing the Seventh Doctor, Dark Doctor. It's a different thing again. And I just think it's a really nice example of what McCoy actually can do.
Brilliant. Good call there. For McCoy, I've gone with Sense8. Now, I went with this because, good old Sylve hasn't been in a lot of notable things, so it might be easy to have picked this or The Hobbit or something like that. But honestly, my wife and I actually devoured Sense8 when it was on TV. It was basically JMS, who's a big favourite of us,
yes,
and the Wachowskis, who wrote this series, which is about people who are mentally connected because they were born at the same time around the world, and they can sort of communicate mentally with each other even when they're in their different countries of origin. So it's very cool, and it zips all around the world because you might have the guy who was born at this time in Germany communicating with someone doing something over in the US, or a guy who's running around in a little bus in Africa. And they're all part of this little cell, and they're all connected through their birth dates. It's a really interesting, and Sylvester comes in the second series as a very mysterious sort of character, kind of the stuff he does well. I think Sense8 is a great underrated series. I hardly ever hear anyone talk about it, and I think, come on, this was a really good series. JMS and the Wachowskis, and a big budget. Oh, why don't more people talk about Sense8, Dave? I don't know.
Yeah, it's something that I have often said I need to watch, and once again, we talked about the listeners maybe going and watching some of this stuff. I need to go and watch a couple of these picks you've reminded me to see, so that's a really good call. Our final one, Rob, I'll get you to keep going with Paul McGann.
Paul McGann. I've gone with lesbian vampire killers, Dave. That's a joke. Actually, it's not a joke. The film is real. I promoted it when I was at Paramount,
yes,
and McGann is in it.
Yes, he is.
It's just not my pick.
That's reassuring.
I just thought I'd say it to see if the listeners were still awake out there. Look, there's a lot of good McGann stuff. Do I go for something like The Hanging Gale, which was partly shot in Ramilton in Donegal, which is where my family are from? Well, part of my family at least. Do I say With Nail and I because that's what everyone's expecting me to say? But honestly, even though he's just a supporting character, I'm going to say the Hornblower series because I just bloody love those TV movies, Dave. And I love McGann as Mr. Bush in Hornblower.
He is really, really good in that. And I've got to admit, when I met Paul McGann and was getting my copy of Timeframe signed, the thing that I said to him was, look, I just want to say I really loved you in Hornblower and I'd love you to do some more. And he leant over and he said conspiratorial to me, look, I'd love to do some more, but it's Ian Griffin. Every time somebody asks him publicly, do you want to do more? He says yes, but the bastard won't do it. So I thought that was really interesting. Look, I had Hornblower as one on my list. I've got to say, McGann was probably the hardest one of all of them to pick. And we got lots of feedback on this one again on Twitter. Mark Cockram suggested the Monocle Mutineer.
That's a popular one, yeah.
Rob Kelly was with you and said Hornblower. And Professor Stephen Hawkwind said Give Us a Break, which was a very cool series he did with Robert Lindsay where he was a pool shark. And it wasn't a bad series, but they quickly ran out of really clever ways to have the plot hinge on a game of pool in the end.
So no one said lesbian vampire killers?
No one said lesbian vampire killers.
Okay.
I'm going with the one you mentioned at the start, Rob, and that is The Hanging Gale, which was a 4-part miniseries in 1995, starring Joe McGann, Mark McGann, Stephen McGann, and Paul McGann as brothers. So that was kind of one of the big publicity things around it at the time. It was a British-Irish co-production with Michael Kitchen as the antagonist, because I think in 1995 there was a law that said everything the BBC made that year had to have Michael Kitchen in it. And he was very, very good. But it is set in 1846 in Ireland. It's just at the start of the Blight. It's just at the time when things were really going bad for Ireland. And one thing that I think brings that home is the population of Ireland in 2022 is still lower than the population of Ireland in 1840 before the Blight hit.
Yeah,
that's how much it hasn't still recovered as a country. But Paul McGann is in this. He's got a really different role to some of the other brothers, and it's a really interesting role because he rubs up against his brothers in quite a dramatic way. But it's just a really good piece of television from that period where the BBC really was just making some amazing historical dramas. Rhodes was another one that came out of this period as well that was really good. And look, of all the Doctors we've listed, there are perhaps better actors than Paul McGann, but in terms of bodies of work on television, he's perhaps got the best.
Oh, I think so. And all his voiceover work as well.
There's so much good stuff we had there that we could have picked for Paul McGann. So, yeah, just a really talented actor, and we were lucky to have him for the 90 minutes we did. And look, I know it's probably a fantasy, but if Disney money can give us anything, I'm with the people. Give us the Paul McGann spin-off.
Indeed.
We should just mention that, look, we didn't pick anything for Ncuti Gatwa because he is brand new as the Doctor. The only thing I've seen him in is Sex Education. And I think most people know that he's in that and he's awesome in that. And Rob, I don't think you've even seen that.
No, I've not seen Sex Education.
No, so look, I think that we just weren't able to say that, but hopefully we'll see a lot more of Ncuti Gatwa. And I will just put a shout out to John Hurt, of course, for those who want us to include the War Doctor. It would obviously have to be Caligula in I, Claudius, but again, what an amazing body of work.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there are our picks for Doctor actors in other TV and movie. Please let us know which ones you love or which ones you think we've missed.
Yeah, or which ones you're going to go out and watch.
Yeah, and if you do, let us know what you think. That it would make me so pleased if people heard this podcast and went out and saw some of these really good bits of television.
Sense8.